Hi there, Margaret Byrd here, and welcome to Color Quest. We have been working for the past few weeks on some really fun ways to work with iron, and that is using rust. Now, last week we introduced 3 tannins into the mix because there's a beautiful reaction between iron and tannin. But this week, I'd like to look at a tannin that you have probably right in your kitchen, and that is black tea. So grab yourself some of those tea bags and let's brew up some tannin and use that as our dye pot to try some new ways to make rusted prints on fiber. So how is this going to be any different than what we looked at last week when we explored the interaction of tannin and iron in the form of rusted prints on fiber? Well, we are not going to be using vinegar, water, and salt today, but rather the heat of the stovetop and actually cooking our prints. So you're still going to need your rusty metal. We'll make some prints right in the tea bath. I'm also going to repurpose some of the prints because they could use a little something something. And we will be dipping some of our rusted paper prints right in the teapot as well. So black tea is fairly high in tannin, and we can use it in our dye practice as we would for either a dye or a tannin to help with the bind between natural dye and fiber. As you can imagine, black tea also produces a really beautiful color. So what we're going to be doing today is both. We're going to be taking advantage of that gorgeous beige color that tea can bring, just a simple dye, but also using the tannin in that tea to have that interaction with the iron in the form of rust. The amount of tea that you need is really dependent upon how many pieces of fiber you're going to be using. Today, we're going to cook up a nice dark brew of black tea. So I'm choosing to use 25 tea bags. You can use fewer or more depending upon how much fiber you have. You're just going to have to experiment and see what works. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is the pot that you're going to be using. Because we're going to be introducing iron in the form of rusty material and tannin, you are going to get that interaction that creates grays and blacks. In my own dye studio, I have one pot that I have designated to do anything with iron, and especially if I'm going to be combining iron and tannin. It will discolor your pot, and over time it could impact other things that you do in that dye pot. So find a pot for today that you don't mind designating to become your iron pot. So while our tea is steeping, let's take a look at the fiber we're going to work with today. Here is a piece of the rust printed paper that I made a few videos ago. So I cut it in half, and I'm going to take one side to use in the tea, and the other side I will keep, and then we'll be able to see the difference using those 2 prints. I have a small piece of the rust wrapped wool, and then I have 3 scrap pieces again. Now this was an old rust print that I did about a year ago where I was just testing some things out, and didn't work very well. Same here with this cotton piece. It's quite long. It's got bits and pieces of some prints, but again, I was just kind of testing things out and didn't get much in the way of prints. So I'm going to reuse all of these. And then this piece was also a failed attempt at echo printing. There's going to be some tannin already in there because these are the flowers, and I definitely pre-treated this. So I'm not sure if I used a tannin or not, probably not, but we'll just go ahead and repurpose all of these pieces. Remember, since we're working with iron and rust, it's best if you are wearing gloves for this activity. You don't want to stain your hands or maybe be irritated by the rust and the metal that you're going to be working with. For the rusty material, I am going to be using the same rusted nails and brackets that I've used for the past few videos. Any rusty metal will work. I encourage you to get creative and see if you can find different shapes and sizes to bring into today's process. So you probably recognize these pieces by now. I'm going to be continuing to use them. Got our little brackets, this larger piece of rusted metal that was a stake, and then we've got our bent larger nails, which I just love, and they've made some really beautiful prints. So we will be using these in some binding and wrapping techniques. We will need some string for binding. I'm repurposing string that I've used many times for this process and other things with iron and tannin. And then I also repurposed my rubber bands. So we'll start out with this piece of silk. So I'm going to take this rusted screw, just going to do a simple binding around this piece of metal to add a little bit more rust to it, but in a more haphazard way. So I will take that and just sort of twist it around very loosely, but then I'm going to use my twine here to wrap around and create a little bit more resist and some tightness so that we get a lot more of that rusted metal over it. Very simple, easy technique. You can bind this as tight as you want, as many times as you want. Just know that you're going to have more resist the more times you add wraps to it. But we also want to make some contact with that one piece of rusty metal. It is silk, so it'll be quite fine and thin. So I'm guessing we'll see some of that rust coming through. But remember, we're also going to be dyeing this fiber with the tea, as well as getting that tannin reaction. So these places where the tea can't get to, we might even have some pieces that stay lighter. There we go. We'll tie that off, and there's our first piece to go into the pot. All right, this next piece is cotton, but it's thin cotton. Since it's the thinner, I'm going to just use these pieces, which are a little more delicate. I'm going to scatter them about. Let's fold this over like this, and then why don't we do a second layer here? And this is really just playing around with different ways in which you can fold to create different resists, and also adding patterns to multiple sides. There is no science to it. It's all about trial. And I'm not going to say error because each one will bring about something unique. Then I'm going to fold this piece this way. And then why don't we roll it like this to get some more resist going on. We'll make a little bundle. I think for this one, I'm going to go ahead and use my rubber bands to secure it. We can move our rubber bands around as well. because they will create some kind of resist on the outside to the tea. The color is going to change. Maybe I'll do one this way too. Why not, right? There we go. I think I'll stretch out these rubber bands a little bit so that the bind is a little more across more of the actual fiber. There we go. All right, there's our second piece. Here's our final piece of cotton. This cotton is quite thick, so I have a very long piece. So I think for this one, we'll utilize a combination of folds and placement of the different larger pieces. So maybe we'll do this kind of a fold, one that's used often in shibori techniques. We'll just place things as we go along, maybe going slightly different directions. And of course, some of these pieces might pop out, and that's okay too. You can always just push it back in. We'll have this big piece go somewhere in the middle here, but I will add a piece here as well, and we'll maybe do it that way, and then come across here. Yeah, I can get about 2 more folds in, I think. So I will add another small piece there. We'll fold that, and then we've got this really long piece. I'm going to have to tuck that in there as well. And it's not a perfect length, so it won't be exact, but that's okay too. I really like this, so I'm going to try to get that into the fold there, and we can wrap it over. And then we can use our string to start tying around to create those bundled connections there. Again, I'm not worried about it being precise. I'm just looking to bundle it up and try to capture bits and pieces of that rust while we're printing inside of the tannin bath. That is tea, so we're going to get a beautiful combination of color, and this piece snuck out, so I think I'll just wrap that in like that. Take it around. There's our final bound piece. Okay, you know the drill. We need to wet out our fiber before it's going to go into our tea bath. I'm just going to place all of these pieces into some lukewarm water, and we'll get those wetted before they go into our tannin tea bath. Remember that wool takes a little bit longer to wet out, so you might need 10 minutes or 15 with that in order to get it good and saturated with water. It just helps to receive dyes, mordants, and everything in our dye pot when we work with wet fiber. We've had our tea steeping for quite some time now, maybe 45 minutes. It's that really beautiful color. It will require us to be simmering our pieces because we're looking for that combination of tannin and the beautiful color of tea as an actual dye source. So we'll put each one of our pieces into the bath, making sure that we have enough room for them. You always want to check to make sure that the bundles that you make are going to be able to fit into your dye pot. And these are pretty small pieces. We'll have a nice mixture of things here. Last piece can go right in. We'll put that back on to the stove top and let that simmer for about an hour, and then check to see what we got. All right, right, I went ahead and let these sit overnight. I didn't have to, but I figured why not give them a chance just to sit with the metal. And I did have my paper rip when I took it out of the water. So you do want to be careful. Obviously, the paper was in heated water, which makes the paper more fragile. So be cautious when you're doing this if you are using paper so that you don't rip something that you don't want to. This piece of wool also is dry and was rinsed. So I'm not going to rinse that again, but I'm going to unwrap these pieces and go ahead and put them in a rinse bucket in their open state so they can rinse out any residual bits that are in the nooks and crannies, because we have nooks and crannies in these. Okay, so first one I'm going to open up is this one, and you can see we got some pretty interesting prints just from the rubber bands. Ooh, fun! Oh, I like how this one turned out. Look at that. Oh, I really like that. Okay, happy. Got some really nice looking prints from the metal brackets. I will take those out. Open it up. This is on a light piece of cotton. Oh, really pretty print there. Oh, I like that. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and put this into some water to rinse. Let's open the next one. You can see we've got some differences going on there as well, which is going to be kind of fun. Okay, we should get a sort of spiral print on this one, which we did. Also lovely. Got some nice variations of darks, some grays, and then we also did pick up some rust prints as well that were protected from the tannin, so they kept their rusty look. The final piece is this one, which is that thicker cotton. Curious about this one. I know that that mark there was the rust that was already on there, so it got nice and dark from being in that tannin in the tea. Okay, so we've definitely got some pretty dark stripes in here, but also quite a bit more rust. So that one is more uniformly gray. But again, every material, textile kind, is gonna potentially interact differently with the tannin as well. So let's put that in to soak. Now you can see that all of my rusty pieces are now black, and that is because they were in tannin. So I am still going to rinse these. I will actually put a little soapy water in and probably scrub them a bit. Try to welcome that rust surface back. But these are still totally viable pieces to use for the future. And I will also repurpose my string, as I always do. Probably put that into the soapy water to help just move these around so they can get rinsed on the inner portions. You can see the water did turn, so they still have some tea or tannin that hasn't stuck, and so we want to get that off the surface. All right, once that gets a good soak, we will put them out to dry. In the meantime, I'll go ahead and collect these and also give them a good wash and scrub. So before I let these dry, actually, I'm gonna put them through a soapy wash and then another rinse, because we do want to make sure that we're getting any residual rusted iron and tannin mixture that didn't adhere off. It can be rough on fiber, this whole process, as you might imagine. So you do want to try to get rid of as much residual as you can. So I'm gonna put these through, as well as my twine, which I'll use again for this process, and give them a good second rinse after I give them this wash. Then I can use this water, which is a little dirty, to clean my rusty metal. That looks pretty good. I'm not seeing too much come out, so I feel pretty good about that. Finish up the rest. All right, everything's been washed, rinsed, dried, and even ironed because you are that special. And I have to tell you a little secret. I didn't think I was going to enjoy this as much as the other rust printing techniques that we've done, but honestly, it far exceeded my expectations. So check out these results. Let's start with the paper. I mean, if you're talking about darkness, look at that. So this was the paper that I cut in half. This was a simple rust print that I had done on paper in the very first video. And then look at what happened to it when I put it into the tea. Now, unfortunately, it did rip, as you know. And so you do have to be careful when you're introducing paper to hot water, but wow, what a difference. And look, we really did get those blacks and a really beautiful dark gray. Okay, next, let's look at the wool. This was from last week. This is just the gallo tannin piece that we did. But look at what happened when we did it in the tea itself. We got these beautiful browns, that really lovely tea color, and then darkness almost to black where it interacted with the rust. And let me tell you, I think that that is beautiful. And can you imagine even working with both of these together on some knitting project? Pretty spectacular. Now, this piece absolutely is a winner for me. 100%. I adore this result. I was a little concerned that it was going to be too much rust and that somehow it would just end up being black. But oh my gosh, look at what we got. This beautiful interaction where parts of the rust went onto the fiber but didn't touch the tannin teas because it was bound and left these incredible marks. We also got lovely white marks where we had the rubber bands and the binding. And just overall, I thought this one turned out absolutely beautiful. And remember, this piece was a failed print that I had done, and I'm so glad I kept it because now look what I was able to do. This is called repurposing fiber and making something beautiful out of something that wasn't. All right, then let's move on to this cotton piece. This one did have some rust that was already on it, but we added all of those large metal nails. And I'm happy with the fact that we did get some areas where the rust printed and it didn't touch the tannin here and here. But overall, a lot of it interacted directly with the tannin in the tea, and we got these nice, beautiful black patterns. So although it wasn't uniform, and that makes sense because this probably was on the inside and had more resist from the tea itself, that we were able to capture some of these rusted prints to where this was most likely on the outside and it was just exposed directly to the tea and the tannin. Overall though, again, for a piece that really had nothing going on, it now has a little something something going on. Okay, and then also very happy with this. This is the silk piece that we did a very simple bind around one of the rusty nails. It did have a little bit of printing already on it, but look at the different patterning that we got in here because we bound it and then we wrapped it with string. So all of this resist kept both the metal from interacting and bringing a rust pattern, but also the tea from coloring it. You can see here where we really had a strong reaction between the rust and the tannin, but then other areas that were tucked away, and so they retained their beautiful rusty printed effect. Very, very interesting print, and certainly 1,000 times better than what was there before. So I'm pretty impressed with this whole process using tea as a tannin in rust printing. So yet again, this idea of experimentation and exploring can really bring about surprises in your dye practice. I did not expect to love the end result, and of all of the things that I've done so far, this is up there. I mean, what an incredible inventory of fiber I have now. Over 5 weeks of exploring rust printing and different ways in which to enhance them, especially with the interaction of rust or iron and tannin. I've learned so much over these last 5 weeks, and I hope that you are as excited about rust printing and iron and tannin as I am. Now, next week on Color Quest, I want to do one more experiment, and that is not going to involve rust, but we will be printing with iron and tannin and then introducing it to calcs. You're not going to believe what happens then. Go out, find some rusty bits, start playing around with this process, and know that within my own art practice, iron and tannin combos are really one of my favorite things to work with. I will see you here at Color Quest next Friday. 4 weeks